All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Gaurav. I'm a group program manager in the Azure Purview team. I'm here with Evangeline, who's also from the Purview team, and together we're going to present about how you can do unified data governance with Azure Purview. We have a pretty packed agenda today in terms of what we want to present in the next 50 minutes, starting with what are some of the data governance challenges that we are seeing working with a bunch of customers. We'll talk a little bit about what is Azure Purview and how do we see the different pieces in Purview, starting with the platform and applications come together. Then we're going to show you a bunch of things in action where Evangeline is going to show you a cool demo and walk you through how you can use Purview today in your organizations. Then we're going to switch a little bit about how you can bring all of these pieces together with a bunch of Microsoft investments that customers have already done and how governance would play a part in those. We have a bunch of customer stories to share with you. We'll talk about roadmap and some of the resources that you can use to get started. But before I start into this, with a quick show of hands, how many of you do governance in some sort of fashion in an organization today? Great. So some of you do, most of you, as I saw, the hands didn't go up. And how many of you know about Azure Purview or kind of used it in any meaningful way? Great. So I think it would be quite good for the remaining folks, as I didn't see a bunch of hands go up about Azure Purview as well. So before we go into what is Azure Purview, I want to start with some of the data governance challenges. As we work with customers, and you guys know data is the most strategic asset for any company today. In fact, IDC predicts that by 2025, there would be 175 zettabytes of data. That's quite a bit. And if you take that data and think about what are some of the challenges that are coming in play from a data governance standpoint, there are two ends of the spectrum here. On the left-hand side, most of the organizations are looking to see how they can centralize data discovery and determine what data they have in the organization. So today, you can imagine that there might be operational silos in the organization, and what companies are looking to do is eliminate those silos with a data discovery piece so that they can answer those questions in terms of what data exists in their organization. Whereas on the right-hand side, there is a compliance need with respect to different regulations like GDPR, SHRIMPs that are coming into play, and you want to understand the risk profile of data in your organization. So we are increasingly seeing this role called Chief Data Officer as we work with more and more customers coming into play, and this role is becoming interdisciplinary. So if we were to take those challenges and see what are some of the elements of successful data governance, we think that there are these four, as we have learned from customers and following up the industry for a while now. The first one is with the volume, variety, and velocity of data, companies want to manage the growing data landscape. Once they do that, they want to eliminate operational silos. As I mentioned, finance, if there is a particular data set that finance is looking at, they want to make sure that that data set is consistent across all the business units in the organization, and you're not maintaining copies of that. Now, once you do that, you are going to inherently increase the agility of data in your organization, and finally, you want to comply to these different industry regulations. So with that in mind, we have released a service called Azure Purview. This became generally available in September of last year, and it's a unified data governance service that allows you to maximize the business value of data. And it does so by reimagining data governance in the cloud, which means it's a cloud-native service which kind of embraces the hybrid nature of your data estate. Second, it lays the foundation of effective data governance. Now, what that means is that it all starts with data. So it helps you understand what data exists in your data estate so that you can lay the foundations of pieces like policy enforcement in future, doing privacy in future. So you need to understand your data in order to do that. Then, as I mentioned, it maximizes the business value of data. So a lot of users in the organization today are business users who do not understand technical assets like your SQL DB, your Cosmos DB. They are looking for terms like percentage sales, and they want to use those terms to search information in the organization. So how you would do that, how you would maximize that business value is something that we are trying to accomplish with Azure Purview. And then finally, from a chief data officer perspective, you want to gain these insights into your data estate to understand what data exists. You want to understand from a compliance standpoint, what is the risk profile of data? So do you have a bunch of credit card information in your data estate? Where does that information exist? So that's an important piece which in Purview allows the chief data officer and their office to essentially see, and then they can navigate and understand that. So if I were to overlay all of this with a picture, with respect to Azure Purview, how do you do the unified data governance? Now, it all starts with the data map, which is our platform, where we have these scanners that are going into your data estate. And as I mentioned, from get-go, we have embraced the hybrid nature of data, which means that your data could be on-prem, multi-cloud, SaaS sources, operational sources. And these scanners go scan your data estate and build this data map. Now, think of this data map as a graph where we are capturing key pieces of information like technical metadata, semantic metadata, and many other types. And on top of this platform, there are different applications, starting with Purview Data Catalog, which allows you to browse and search information in your data map. And then data insights, as I mentioned, from a data officer perspective, which allows you to gain insights into your data estate, like what data exists, the risk profile of data, what business terms you have, and all. And then on top of it, we have an application called Purview Studio, which you'll see as part of the demo, where all of these applications can be used. And then Purview as a service is tightly integrated with other services like SQL Server, where you can scan your on-prem SQL Server, your Azure SQL Server instances, SQL on an ISVM, SQL managed instance. You can go and scan your entire Power BI tenant to catalog your reports and dashboards. There's embedded search available in Azure Synapse, where instead of just being able to search local to your Synapse workspace, now you can search across your entire hybrid data estate because Purview is scanning your on-prem instances, your Teradata instances, your SAP instances. So all the third-party sources where it is scanning are now, that information is also available in your Synapse workspace, which earlier, if you think from an analyst or a data scientist perspective, they didn't even know existed in their organization. So the value prop is huge. Now, if you think about governance as a whole, you should think of it as a horizontal play. Now, what that means is you have your operational databases, you have your analytics and business intelligence with Synapse, with Power BI, and governance goes across all of these pieces. Right? So think of it that they are governed from get-go. So now if I want to go a little bit deep into what is the data map, what is the catalog and the insights piece, think of data map, as I mentioned, as a graph where we are capturing key pieces of information. As I mentioned, the technical metadata, which is what is your column name, what is the description, what is the sensitivity label that has been applied to a particular column. And similarly, your semantic metadata, which is as these scanners are running, they are also classifying the data to say, oh, this column is a social security number, or this column is an Australia tax file number. And today we have 200 plus classifiers out of the box across different domains like personal, government, social security. And by the way, these are one-to-one match with Microsoft 365. So if you have customers who are using M365 in their organization, and they use what M365 calls as Security and Compliance Center, and they apply those sensitive info types, these are the same sensitive info types that have been extended now to your entire hybrid data estate with Azure Purview. Earlier, they were only limited to your SharePoint documents, your Word, your email. So all of that extension has taken place with Azure Purview. And one of the other key points with our data map is that it is conformant to open source Apache Atlas. Now, that's a very important point from an extensibility standpoint because today, you can think of that we support 48 sources which we can scan, and we are on a very aggressive journey to double and triple those connectors. But with our support with Atlas, there's an extensibility part because Atlas is a type model. So with the sources that we support, those sources, 48 sources, we have already defined the system types. You just have to register those sources, set up scans, and boom, you're done. But let's say you want to, you have in your organization IBM Informix. So you can define a custom type in Atlas and use our open APIs to push and pull information from the Purview data map. So you're not blocked, right? So that gives a great extensibility point because there's always going to be a source that you want to scan that is on our roadmap or is not supported today in Azure Purview. So it's a very important point from an extensibility standpoint. Now, if you think about automated data discovery and classification, and one thing that I've done on this slide is especially marked the differentiator pieces. If you were to compare with pure play providers like Collibra, Elation that exist in the market today, what are some of our differentiators from that standpoint? So in terms of data discovery, as I mentioned, we have 48 plus sources and file formats supported today. We are available in 23 regions, covering pretty much every geography. And in terms of classification, we have 200 plus out of the box across different domains like personal, government. We allow you to extract lineage. So if your customers are using today Data Factory pipelines or Synapse pipelines, all you need to do is just register with Azure Purview, and that lineage information automatically starts to flow. And this is one of the key use cases because today you can go in your Power BI workspace and look for lineage that is local to that Power BI workspace. But with Purview, you can start with the raw data that could exist in on-prem SQL Server. Then you could be moving that with a Data Factory pipeline to, let's say, your storage account. Then you could be transforming inside a Synapse or a Data Factory pipeline, landing into a warehouse, and then to your presentation layer in Power BI. So to be able to stitch this end-to-end lineage view and do impact analysis, meaning if I were to change this column, what impact will it have downstream? Or do root cause analysis. A failure has happened in my Data Factory pipeline. What caused that failure to happen upstream? What impact will it have downstream? All of those you can see with this lineage view, and it's one of the key use cases with Azure Purview. And then in terms of configuration and management, we support pretty much all SDKs. We are releasing the partial commandlets in the upcoming month. We do support REST APIs and all of that, right? Next, moving on to what is Purview Data Catalog, right? So as you populate your data map, as you do these scans and the data map gets populated, you want to then browse and consume information from the map. So we have this search box, which is backed by a search index. It is blazing fast. It gives you intelligent recommendations, gives you suggestions so that you can discover information. And as I mentioned, there's a whole business metadata piece here as well, which means you could be a business user and searching terms like percentage revenue. So we have a full business glossary experience where you can define these business terms. You can create the relationships of these business terms with physical assets like a Cosmos DB collection or a SQL Server in your in Purview Data Catalog, and then use that business metadata to search information. And our search is smart enough to automatically deduce those relationships to the technical assets and present you that information. Then, as I mentioned, we have this data insights piece from a data officer standpoint, where we allow CDOs today to understand how's the data distributed across your data estate. Is it all in SQL Server? Is it in SAP instances? Is it in Teradata? We allow them to see all the business terms and how that business metadata has been applied to your across your assets in the catalog. And I keep on using this word asset. For us, everything is an asset. Whether it's a SQL Server table, a storage container, everything is an asset for us. Then in terms of understanding from a compliance standpoint, what is the risk profile of the data? So what data do I have from a security standpoint? So is it all credit card number? Is it all social security number? So we have data classification and labeling reports that provide you that. And then we are working on many other insights like data movement. So as you move data from your Data Factory pipelines, what data is crossing geographic boundaries? So you can imagine and insights like that. So we're going to have out-of-the-box insights. And also we see a lot of organizations today taking the data set which powers these insights, because you're always going to have a KPI that you want to monitor in your organization. So they can call our APIs, take that data set, use other tools that exist, slice and dice, and present that information in the organization as well. So I'm going to invite Evangeline now to give a quick demo of all of this that I talked about, and hopefully you can see all of that in action. Evangeline.
Hi, I'm Evangeline. I'm a feature PM in the Purview group. I work for Gaurav, but before I was with Microsoft, I actually worked in analytics and in data governance, so have some experience there. Hold on just a minute. All right, so again, some of this will be review from our keynote, but we're just going to go into some more detail on some of the features that Purview has. So here we are in the home screen of the data catalog. This is a demo environment we have set up for one of our customers. We've already cataloged millions of assets here, and we always talk about how Purview is built to scan and catalog at scale. And that's really important because organizations really are dealing with more data than ever. And as someone who's implemented a data governance program at relatively high maturity, it's just crushing to do all of that work and then run into a scale problem. So we want to make sure that that's never going to be a blocker for you. Now, before we have data that's actually available in the data catalog, we need to go populate our data map. So this is kind of a view of how all of that is organized. So as you can see all of the sources that I've already registered, and that information all goes into the underlying graph, just like Gaurav was talking about. If I want to register a new source, I can do that here. And again, as you can see, we support a wide variety of on-prem, SaaS, and cloud sources because we know a lot of customers are in some sort of stage between migration, between on-prem and cloud. People have very, very hybrid data estates, so we want to accommodate all of that. Okay, so let me just close out of here. Now, once you've registered your sources, you can start scanning your data. So I'm going to show you an example of what that looks like. This is just an AdventureWorks SQL database that I've already registered, and if I want to set up a new scan, I'll just select New Scan, and I'll go into the database I want to look at. Going to support, we support a number of methods of authentication. I'm going to use SQL Auth for this one. I'm also going to turn off lineage extraction for now. Now, scanning can be a little tricky, so I'll also test my connection to actually make sure this is working properly. And it's working in a live demo. No room for cowards here. Okay, so once you actually connect to that database, you can choose if you want to scan everything or just do separate individual databases or tables. I'm going to leave everything selected here. And then, like Gaurav mentioned, we support more than 200 classifications out of the box. So, and we are trying to support people globally, right? So not just US metadata and privacy information, but classifiers that are going to apply to people around the world. That all looks good. And then you can also schedule your scans to just run once to see what it looks like, or you can make them recurring to make sure that your metadata is always kept up to date. So I'm just going to cancel out of here. That kind of finishes that flow. I'm not going to scan this right now. Oops, excuse me. Okay. So once you've kind of built your data map, you want to impose some sort of organization on top of that. And you can do that with collections. So collections are going to help you manage role-based access to the metadata in your catalog. And like I said, they can impose some kind of logical organization. So something we see a lot is customers will organize by their departments, for instance, or they might organize by their data domains or by geography if you're keeping track of a number of data centers. Another pattern that's really helpful is to create a collection for kind of your raw metadata that's just entered the catalog that you then can take and curate and steward and promote to a collection that you share with a broader group of stakeholders. So a problem we hear all the time when people go catalog their data estate is they're like, oh gosh, we've got a mess, right? And so collections are going to help you kind of be really strategic about what you present to your stakeholders and then what you take some time to curate and govern behind the scenes. Again, you can manage role-based access, so that's just kind of what that looks like here. If I were a collection admin, I could assign roles to different people in my organization. All right, so, okay. So once you've built and populated your data map, and you have a lot of information in here, it's really helpful to start thinking about what information is most important to you and what you really want to govern, and that's where your business glossary is going to come in. So for example, if you have classifications turned on, your classifications will be able to show you where you have personal data and where you have a person's name, for instance, but if you want to start getting more specific about what that means, glossary terms will really help. So a person's name could be a customer name, it could be an employee name, it could be a marketing prospect name. So that's information that's really important for privacy regulations. And a glossary is going to help you do that. The other thing to think about if you're really just starting a data governance journey is how to build that glossary. One of the things I heard all of the time when I was talking to my peers in the industry is they'd say, gosh, we just don't know where to start. And I promise you that somebody in your organization already has a business glossary. It might be on their laptop, it might be on a SharePoint site, but that's a great way to just sort of start incrementally and build your data governance program. A lot of the times people are afraid to share that information, but once you share it, then you can have the conversations you need about whether it's right and correct or not. So that's just a nice iterative way to build your glossary. And if I didn't mention it before, you can just import that en masse in the catalog, so that's really nice. We actually just, once you're ready to start being really strategic and mature about how you govern your information, you can use workflows to do that. So this is new this week, right? Yes, so this glossary workflow is new this week. This is going to help you actually promote glossary terms from draft status to actually approved and official to use at your organization. So that's really nice. Okay, so I'm just going to switch gears for a minute to a catalog where I have elevated permissions. And I'll go into insights. So this is insights, like Gaurav mentioned. It can be really challenging to get a really nice bird's eye view of the information in your data estate. So insights is meant to kind of roll all of that information up to somebody who's working as a CDO or some other type of governance officer, right? So this is going to show kind of the distribution of assets and data sources across our organization. I can also go into the classifications here, and we can see, again, just the distribution of classifications throughout our organization. This is going to help us start to understand our overall risk exposure from a personal data perspective. It's also going to help us find that information really quickly if we're just trying to get a sense of how good we're doing from a compliance perspective. Okay. All right, so now that we've done all that, I'm actually going to jump back into the data catalog and search for some information. So if you went to the keynote, you would have seen this. This is an example of just an asset that you can find in the catalog. Everything's an asset, whether it's a table or a file share or a schema. This ticket payment info table has been certified. That's, again, a really helpful feature when you start thinking about how you share this information with your stakeholders. So a lot of data is replicated for different reasons in an organization. This is going to help you say, hey, this is the best data. Go look at this table. This is the one that you should be using for reporting. In the overview page, you can get an overview of the classifications applied to the data, the glossary terms that have been tagged to it, its hierarchy in your data estate, as well as the fully qualified name. Once you go into schema, you get this really detailed view. So you can see all of the column names, the classifications tagged to those specific columns. If you have sensitivity labels, if you're using those in your organizations, like Gaurav said, it's just a one-to-one mapping. It's going to map exactly what you have in Office 365, so that's great. The more curated this data is, so there's descriptions for each one of these columns, right? The more curated that is, the more that'll be promoted in search, because that's generally the most important data to share with users. And then we're really proud of how we're focusing on lineage. So you shouldn't have to go buy another solution to get lineage into your data estate. It should just be available in a governance product. So this is an area where we're investing heavily and doing a ton of really exciting work. And again, I say that as someone who's worked in data governance, not just as a Microsoft representative. Okay, so you can see column level lineage here. That's going to be really nice for impact analyses, right? You can't know what's going to impact things downstream if you can't see individual field lineage. So I'll just, again, kind of show you what that looks like. And then, a really common problem anywhere is that often people don't, even if you have really good information in your data catalog, they still don't necessarily trust that. People trust people more than they trust data a lot of the time, even people who work with data. And so that's where your contacts come in. So you can assign experts to each data source. That's just going to help people find the information they need. Okay, so we've done classifications. Thank you. I just have one last feature to show. So again, we touched on this in the keynote. This landed in preview this week, and what this is SQL dynamic lineage. So this is really, really exciting. Lineage can be incredibly complex to understand, and what this is going to show you is not just static lineage, but actual lineage for SQL stored procedures. There's a fair amount of detail here, so you can actually select this runs, like the run of the stored procedure itself, and get even more information here. So you can get this really precise column mapping. You can see the duration in milliseconds of that job. You can see the inputs and outputs. You can also see the number of rows that are involved. So again, this is really, really detailed, pretty advanced information for the industry, and I just think it's really, really cool. Okay, so I think, yep, so that's what we've got for you. That gives you a pretty good overview of what's available in the catalog today, and it's really worth kind of following what's being released on social media because the product is just advancing incredibly rapidly right now. So we're releasing new classifications, new sources, really every quarter, and new features are kind of landing all of the time. So, all right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Evangeline. Yeah, so I'm really proud of the team because you saw, right, like there are new features that we are releasing almost every week with new sources to the workflow pieces that we showed you. And there's a session coming around self-service access workflow in the next 1 hour where I'll talk more about it. In the lineage pieces, right, because it's very important today, that's a true differentiator between what Purview does versus the competitors because everywhere, when you think about lineage, it's static lineage. But for the first time in the industry, there is a dynamic lineage that Purview is supporting, which means as your stored procedures are executing, how the transformations are happening inside, how the data is flowing, we are able to present that information so that, again, as a data analyst, you're able to track how your data is moving through the raw zone, to your transformation, to your warehouse, to your presentation layer. So that's truly revolutionary from a governance standpoint that any product supports today. Now, one thing that you should think about is there is, as I mentioned, right, I've been consistently using this term, we have embraced the hybrid nature of your data, which means data is on-prem, multi-cloud SaaS sources. But because we have this inherent integration with Microsoft services, whether it is Synapse, Power BI, things are inherently going to get better over there from a governance standpoint. So if you think about Purview and how you can make most of your Microsoft investments, right? So you have Power Platform, you have Azure, you have multi-cloud and SaaS sources. This is the third-party play that I talked about, your operational and SaaS operational and analytical databases that we have, Microsoft 365, SQL Server, and think of Purview as the center which is governing all of these resources. As I mentioned, with Power BI, right, we can scan your entire Power BI tenant. With Synapse, there is this embedded search that's available inside your Synapse workspace, as you can see, right? You can do a Purview-powered search to discover Oracle assets, which again, from a data analyst or a data scientist perspective, they didn't even know existed in their organization, right? And obviously then they can connect to it, bring it in their Synapse workspace and start to work with that particular data to do some sort of data intelligence or data analysis, if you will. And then in terms of Power BI, again, you can go to your Power BI workspace and look at the lineage local to that workspace. But imagine if you are able to scan the entire Power BI tenant. So you're able to see across workspaces. You're able to see from the raw zone where your data could be an on-prem SQL server, then coming to some sort of transformation in a Synapse pipeline, warehouse, and then presentation layer. So to be able to, again, stitch that end-to-end is something that Purview enables, which, again, none of the other tool enables today in terms of governance in the industry. Then similarly, we have talked a lot about the M365 integration. So this kind of shows you that if you have customers who are using M365 today and are using Security and Compliance Center, they were earlier able to apply these Microsoft Information Protection labels, which we call as the MIP labels. It's like the highly confidential that you can tag onto your email. That's nothing but a MIP label. Now, earlier it was only limited to the Office ecosystem, to your SharePoint files, to your Word documents. But now, you can extend that label taxonomy to your entire hybrid data estate, whether it's SQL Server columns, your Cosmos DB collections, your Oracle databases, Oracle tables, all of that can be done with Azure Purview. And once this labeling is there, the tagging is there, then obviously you will be able to enforce in future with the upcoming work that we are working around policy pieces. Okay. So, in terms of customers, we have a bunch of customers, and since we have gone GA, we have been growing very rapidly because, as you would imagine, governance is top of mind for almost every CIO or a CTO today. So there are a bunch of case studies that are live. This one that went live recently where Heathrow Airport is using Azure Purview to actually understand different data signals. Earlier, it was so haphazard. It was a manual ad hoc process. But now with Azure Purview, they're able to understand the different signals from different data that is getting pumped through so that they can make agile decisions, right? So it's very important for them. It's actually working great. They are in production. They recently went to production, and they have been using our platform consistently in the last 1 year. Then there is Grundfos, which is it's a pump manufacturer, and before they started using Azure Purview, they were actually using Excel to track all the different data that they had in their organization. As you would imagine, again, a very manual ad hoc process. Now, with Purview, they're able to centralize their data discovery to understand what data exists in their organization, so that they can lay the foundations of effective data governance, right? So again, a company that has been able to use Purview and become fully automated in terms of centralizing that data discovery piece. Similarly, in the finance space with Illimity Bank, similar use case that they have been using Purview to do business monitoring and making decisions quickly. So all of these case studies are live today. They have a bunch of information around how they are using Purview, how they have implemented in their organization for you to kind of use and use those as reference patterns, if you will. And then in terms of features and roadmap, so we talked about the Purview data map, where we have automated scanning of different hybrid sources available. So as I mentioned, we have 48 sources available today, and we are on a very aggressive journey to double and triple those connectors. Just like today, you see in Data Factory, there are 98 plus connectors. You'll be seeing all of those lighting up here as well. And in terms of reaching your on-prem footprint, it's the same self-hosted integration runtime. If you guys have used Data Factory or Synapse, that has now been extended to do metadata management and classification with Azure Purview. Next, we are also doing multi-cloud, right? And here we have multi-cloud scanning for Amazon S3. We recently added GCP as well. So in terms of presentation layer, Google Looker is also supported. So all of those sources are coming up. And one thing I want to mention here that a lot of our customers today do manual connection source by source, meaning they would connect to a S3 account or to a storage account, or they use what we call as well-known hierarchies. So today, Azure has a hierarchy, meaning you have a management group, you have a subscription, a resource group inside a management group, a subscription inside that. So you can come and register a subscription today with Azure Purview. And we will do the heavy lifting of automatically determining what are the storage accounts, what are the Cosmos DBs in that subscription, and bringing that under the governance umbrella of Purview. And this is a very important point, right? Because now we are going to bring that under the governance umbrella, and we're also going to keep your data map updated. Because we are continuously listening to the ARM change feed, the Azure Resource Manager change feed, where if you tomorrow delete a storage account, your data map will automatically be reflected for that as well. And then we are not only limiting to Azure, today we also support registering an AWS account. And once you do that, we will automatically bring all the S3 buckets, all the RDS instances. And in future, as we light up more and more AWS sources, we'll be able to bring that under the governance umbrella of Purview as well. Then there is data classification, and this is key to Azure Purview to be able to classify your data out of the box. And we showed you 200 plus system classifiers as Evangeline was doing the demo. But here we also allow customers to bring their own classifiers as well, which means that if your customer has a transaction ID column in their database and they want to represent the semantics of that using a regular expression or using a data dictionary, we do allow that as well. So custom classifications, bring your own classification is supported as well. And then the important point, as I mentioned from an extensibility standpoint, that the platform is fully conformant with open source Apache Atlas, which gives you a great extensibility hook to extend the Purview data map. In fact, there are companies like Prophecy, Tamer, Samarch, who are building MDM solutions, master data management solution. The Prophecy one is already live today, and they're able to do that because of the openness of the Purview data map that we have. Then there is data catalog. As we showed you, you can browse and search information. We'll continue to do work over there in terms of search relevancy, which means that you're going to have millions of assets in your organization. So how your results are relevant, which means an example of that would be, if you're an owner of an asset, then we would rank it higher and present it in front of the other assets that we discover. So let's say use a term like sales. So we'll do that search in the order of relevance. So we're doing a bunch of work there. Similarly, business glossary. So we have a full-blown business glossary experience today, but we are expanding that to support multi-glossary in Purview. We are expanding that to add permissioning model with business glossary as well, because today we support the permissioning model with collections, as Evangeline showed you, but a lot of our customers are asking that from a business glossary standpoint as well. Then there is data lineage. As you see that we continue to add more and more sources for data lineage. We announced this week the dynamic lineage for Azure SQL stored procedures. We'll continue to extend that for all flavors of SQL. Then with respect to data insights, the data insights piece is in public preview, so there's a bunch of out-of-the-box reports that you see here. We are continuing to add more reports like stewardship dashboard, which will allow you to track KPIs. And then, as I mentioned, we expose the underneath data set as well, which you can call through the APIs, slice and dice information, build your own custom dashboards as well. And then finally, with respect to integrations, I showed you the Synapse piece, the Power BI piece, the SQL Server integration that we have, where you can scan your on-prem SQL Server, your Azure SQL instances, and the Microsoft Information Protection Labels integration that we have with M365 is in preview that we are looking to GA later this year. So we have a lot of resources to support you in terms of how you can understand more about Purview, how you can look at our documentation. There's a bunch of how-to guides available. We are publishing a bunch of reference patterns as we are working with customers and learning from their stories and enabling more and more customers to use those patterns in their organization. There's a feedback channel where we monitor that very closely in terms of coming up with our planning exercise and look at how many votes a particular item has to incorporate that in our planning. We have a blog. You should follow this. Pretty much we are releasing every week new features, so you should subscribe to that blog. And then there is the discussion alias where you can talk directly with the Purview product team if you have any questions or if you have any comments that you want to provide. So this is what we had for you guys today. If there are any questions, feel free to ask now.
We have 9 questions online.
Oh, great.
So, first one is, do you have any idea when Dataverse sources will be supported?
Okay. So the question is, do you have any idea when Dataverse would be supported? Yes, it is part of our roadmap. We are working on the planning exercise, and once we complete that, we'll be able to provide a timeline for that, but it is definitely on our roadmap to support Dataverse as a source in Purview from a metadata capture and classification and lineage perspective.
One question specifically about the SQL Server stored procedure. Will that work with on-prem?
Yes. So the question is that this week we announced the stored procedure support for Azure SQL. Will it work with on-prem SQL as well? I actually already answered as part of the roadmap that we are working to extend that capability to all flavors of SQL, including on-prem. So that is definitely a work in progress that we are working to release.
Secondary to that is, what's the minimum version that will be working back to?
Yeah. So we are going to start with the latest version of SQL and then see based on feedback that if we have to go back and till how much we have to go back. As you would imagine, there are so many SKUs of SQL available, and this technology that we have for dynamic lineage is based on the SQL X events. So it depends on the version of SQL and whether it has X event support or not.
Comment was, workflow looks strikingly similar to Power Automate.
Yes.
Is there any sort of integration with Automate?
Yes, that's a great question. So the question is that the workflow looks very similar to Power Automate. That is exactly what we are using underneath the hoods, and we want it to be consistent in terms of experience as well. And hence, we have enabled that Power Automate experience in Purview for you to build those workflows. So the way to think about workflows, which I'm very proud to say that it's in public preview, it went public preview yesterday only, where workflow is enabled as a platform capability, and then there are different types of workflows that we are enabling as templates. One of those is business term approval. So anytime you want to define a business term, it can kick off an approval workflow for an owner to approve before that business term takes effect. Similarly, there is self-service access, which means that if you want to actually, if you discover, let's say, a storage container, and you wanted to request access to it, we call it the self-service access workflow, which is the session I'm giving in the next hour I was talking about. And that also triggers a workflow behind the scenes, an approval workflow behind the scenes that we are enabling out of the box. But then we are enabling workflow as a platform capability as well, where obviously in the organizations, you might want to build customized workflows and plug into your data curation processes. So that's what we are working towards. And yes, it is Power Automate underneath the hoods.
So on customization, is there a way to handle in-house application lineage? Is there
Yeah.
an API to call or-
So the question is there a way to handle in-house applications and lineage corresponding to that? Absolutely yes. Again, our conformant with open source Apache Atlas, there's an API available which you can call to actually paint that lineage graph. Now, we are going to inherently do for systems like Data Factory today or Synapse pipelines, and then we're going to extend it to more and more systems. But if you have a customized application and you want to paint the lineage picture, the whole APIs are available. And in fact, there is a how-to guide on how to call that API and paint that lineage picture in our documentation as well.
Another data source question for the roadmap for analysis services. It doesn't specify whether it's on-prem or
Yeah. So I think I know that question. So the question is, when will you support SQL Server analysis services? It is in fact in our roadmap, and we are actually working to understand what it means to support. So probably in this year, in the second half of this year, is when we are planning to add the support for that.
a few more. Are there any plans to produce architecture blueprints
Yes.
and customer something similar to the Power BI Showcase Gallery?
Yeah. So the question is, any plans to publish architecture blueprints? Yes, absolutely. We are working with the Azure architecture team to publish blueprints. The customer stories are already live, which I showed you as part of this session, which are available in the gallery for you to look at those reference patterns as well. But yeah, we're going to be publishing more architecture patterns and blueprints in the gallery as well.
So, I was going to ask a question that someone else has as well. The roadmap. So similar to the Power BI roadmap, which is publicly available, will this one be?
Yeah, so the question is, similarly to the Power BI roadmap, will we have a roadmap published? It's a tricky question because we are now part of this organization, which Power BI also is, and we are internally looking to see how we can publish a roadmap as well. So it's still a work in progress, but you will be able to see the roadmap from your field rep or from, because we are continuously publishing the roadmap for the next 6 months to them. But how we publish it externally is still a work in progress that we are looking to see how we can do it effectively for everyone.
So last one so far. When a data source is used by multiple departments, what would be the best way to assign that data source to a collection?
Yeah. So the question is, if a data source is used by multiple departments, what is the best way to assign that to a collection? It's a great question because you should think of collection as an ownership hierarchy, which means that a source can only be registered to a particular collection, right? And then there is work we are doing in terms of logical groups, which I think Evangeline can talk much about because she's driving that work. We call those as data domains, where you'll be able to have a source as part of multiple groups and track that with those logical groups. So today, collections is an ownership hierarchy. The logical grouping with data domains is a work in progress in Azure Purview that we'll release in incremental click stops.
What data sources are/will be supported for dynamic lineage?
So the question is, what sources are or will be supported for dynamic lineage? The journey here is going to start with SQL, right? So we have released the support for Azure SQL. We are going to first extend it to all flavors of SQL, and then look at other sources based on customer feedback, on what is available in our feedback forum or what we are hearing from customers working one-on-one.
This is the last one. Can we get a URL to the slide deck you've used today?
Yes, we'll definitely post the slide deck and you'll be able to download it and look at it. Awesome. Cool. Any other questions in the room? Yeah, I see one. Great question. So the question is about data quality and will something happen for that? Yes, the answer is yes, and you'll see us talking about more in upcoming sessions where, again, as these scanners are running, we are looking to profile the data to generate quality scores so that you can do assessments like not null checks and all of that. So the short answer to your question is yes. You'll see more and more about that in upcoming iterations. Awesome. Well, if there are no more questions, thank you so much for giving me and Evangeline an opportunity to present today. It was awesome.